The widow's tears. In a far corner of the galaxy, where the stars shine cold and silent, a lonely figure walked slowly through the ruins of her world. She was an alien woman, a widow, carrying the weight of sorrow heavier than any stone. Her 2 small children followed behind her, their tiny steps weak, their faces pale with hunger. The war had taken everything. Her husband was gone, lost in a battle he never returned from. Her home was gone, burned to ash by merciless invaders. Her people had turned away, too busy saving themselves to care for a poor widow and her little ones. She had no food, no roof, and no hope. At night, when the stars shone above like cold eyes, she sat with her children under broken walls. Their stomachs growled, their lips trembled. The little ones asked for food, asked for their father. But she had no answer. Only tears rolled down her face. She tried to be strong, but her heart was breaking. Every morning she rose with only one thought: survive one more day. She searched the ruins for scraps. She begged passing traders for crumbs, but most turned away. Some laughed at her weakness. Some looked with pity but offered nothing. She clutched her children close and whispered promises she did not believe. Her people had rules, strict and cruel. A widow was seen as a burden. A mother with no husband was considered cursed. Some whispered that she was unlucky, that her children would never grow strong. She heard the whispers, she saw the looks, but what hurt most was the loneliness. Her husband had once told her stories of other worlds, of strange species beyond the stars. He had spoken of humans, creatures with fierce hearts, warriors and dreamers. Some said humans were dangerous, quick to fight. Others said they were kind, quick to protect. She never knew which was true. But now, in her darkest days, she wondered, could a human have saved her? Could anyone? One evening, when the red sun sank low and shadows stretched across the broken city, the widow sat with her children. They had not eaten in 2 days. The smallest one, her daughter, pressed her head against her mother's chest and whispered, "Mama, I am so hungry." The boy, a little older, tried to be strong. He held his sister's hand and said, "I will protect you." But his voice shook. The widow looked at them and felt her heart tear. What kind of mother was she? If she could not feed them, what kind of future could they have, when all around them was only dust and death? She lifted her face to the sky and whispered a prayer. Not to her gods, not to her people, but to the stars themselves. "Please, someone, help us." Her tears glistened in the fading light. Her body trembled with exhaustion. But she forced herself to stay awake. If she slept too deeply, she feared she would never wake again. Her children needed her. She had to keep going. The night grew colder. The ruins echoed with distant sounds. Metal scraping, boots crunching over stone. She pulled her children close, her heart racing. Were the raiders back? Would they be captured, sold, or worse? She held her breath, shielding her children with her body. The sound drew nearer, closer and closer, until a shadow appeared among the broken walls. The widow's eyes widened. Her heart froze. She expected a cruel face, a mocking laugh. Instead, what she saw was strange. The figure was tall, broad, carrying strange armor and tools unlike anything her people used. His eyes glowed faintly under the starlight, but they were not cruel. They were tired, perhaps, but strong. And when his gaze fell upon the widow and her children, he did not sneer. He paused, as if surprised. The widow trembled, clutching her little ones. Her people had told many tales of humans. Some said they were monsters. Others said they were saviors. She did not know which stood before her now. The man, the human, raised his hand slowly, showing he carried no weapon. From his bag, he pulled something wrapped in cloth. He knelt down, setting it on the ground. The widow smelled food, warm and real. Her children gasped, their eyes wide with hope. She did not move, fear holding her still. Was this a trick? A trap? The human spoke, his voice deep but calm. The words were strange, but kind. He pushed the food toward her, then stepped back. Her son looked at her, his small hands tugging her sleeve. "Mama, please," he whispered. His eyes begged. Her daughter whimpered softly, reaching for the gift. The widow's heart raced. She did not trust easily, but she saw no malice in the human's face, only a quiet strength. a silent offering. For the first time in many moons, she felt something she thought was lost forever. Hope. As the stars burned above, the widow's tears fell again. But this time, they were not only of sorrow, they were tears of wonder, of fear, and of a question she dared not speak. Was this human the answer to her prayer? A human appears. The night air was sharp, filled with the bitter scent of ash. The widow sat frozen, holding her children close. The stranger before her was unlike anyone she had ever seen. His armor glimmered faintly under the stars, scratched and dented from battles long past. His face was tired, but his eyes carried something that shook her heart. Not cruelty, not greed, but something softer. The human did not move closer. Instead, he stayed a few steps away. His large hands opened to show he carried no weapon. He had placed the food on the cracked stone floor between them, and now he waited silent. His chest rose and fell slowly, as though he understood her fear. The widow's son looked up at her, his small hand clutching her sleeve. His lips trembled as he whispered, "Mama, please." His sister's eyes, wide and wet, fixed on the food. The widow's heart tore apart. Hunger pulled at her, but fear chained her down. What if this man was a raider in disguise? What if he wanted to take her children? Still, the human did not force her. He only looked at her with calm eyes. His voice finally broke the silence, deep and steady. The words were strange, but there was no anger in them. The widow did not understand his language, but she felt the warmth in his tone. Carefully, slowly, she reached out. Her hands shook as she touched the cloth and pulled it toward her. The scent of real bread filled her lungs. Her children gasped as she broke it into small pieces. The little ones ate greedily, tears streaming down their faces. The widow ate nothing. She pushed her share toward them, choosing to stay hungry. The human noticed. His brows furrowed as though he understood her sacrifice. He reached into his pack again and placed more food before her. The widow's eyes widened. She shook her head, pushing it back. But the man only pushed it forward again. His voice rumbled low, gentle but firm. It was clear. He wanted her to eat. He wanted her to survive. For the first time in many long moons, the widow felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. Was this truly kindness? Could a human, a creature her people whispered about with fear, show more compassion than her own kind? The human sat down on a broken stone nearby. Not too close, not too far. His posture was calm. He seemed to be saying, "I will not harm you, I will wait." Her children whispered to each other, their voices small but filled with wonder. The boy said, "Mama, maybe he is not bad." The girl whispered, "He looks strong. Maybe he can help us?" The widow hushed them, fear still gripping her heart. But deep inside, she felt the same question echo. The human looked around the ruins, his eyes sharp, always watching the shadows. He seemed used to danger. His hand often brushed the weapon at his side, but he never raised it toward them. Instead, his gaze returned again and again to the widow and her children. There was something in his look, something protective. The night grew colder, the children curled against their mother, shivering. The human noticed, from his pack. He pulled a large cloth, thick and rough. He stood and moved closer, slowly, step by step. The widow's body stiffened. She held her children tight, but the man knelt and gently placed the cloth beside them. Then he stepped back again, his face calm as though to say, "This is for you." The boy touched it first. He pulled it around his sister, who sighed softly as warmth returned. The widow's lips trembled. She whispered a quiet thank you, though she knew he could not understand. The human's lips curved faintly, not quite a smile, but close. Hours passed. The widow tried to stay awake, but exhaustion pulled at her. She fought it, afraid that if she slept too deeply, danger would come. Yet her eyes grew heavy. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the human sitting awake, his back against the ruined wall, his weapon ready, guarding them. When morning came, sunlight broke through the broken buildings. The widow stirred, her children still wrapped in the cloth. For a moment, she panicked. Had the human gone? But then she saw him, still there, still watching. He looked at her, then pointed to the horizon. His voice rumbled with strange words. He gestured again, this time toward the safer-looking hills beyond the ruins. The widow frowned, trying to understand. Slowly, The meaning became clear. He wanted them to leave the ruins. He wanted to guide them. Her heart raced. Should she trust him? She had lived with betrayal, abandonment, cruelty. But this human had given food, warmth, and safety without asking for anything in return. The children looked at her, their eyes bright with hope. The boy whispered, "Mama, maybe he will protect us." The widow stared at the human, torn between fear and desperation. He was a stranger, a foreigner. But when she looked into his eyes, she did not see lies. She saw strength, and maybe, just maybe, mercy. The human extended his hand, rough and scarred. His gesture was clear. He was asking her to follow. The widow's heart pounded. This moment could decide everything. Their survival, their future, perhaps even their lives. She did not take his hand, not yet, but she rose slowly, gathering her children close. The human nodded once, as if he understood. Together, they began to walk toward the light of the rising sun. And as the ruins of her past fell behind her, the widow dared to think a dangerous thought. Maybe the stars had answered her prayer. The children's plea. The sun rose higher as the small group walked away from the broken ruins. The widow carried her daughter in her arms, while her son held tightly to her hand. Behind them, the city of ashes grew smaller and smaller. Ahead lay the hills, rough and empty, but safer than the ruins filled with raiders. The human walked a short distance ahead. His steps were heavy, steady. He did not speak much, but every so often he glanced back to make sure they followed. His eyes scanned the horizon again and again, always watching, always guarding. The widow studied him as they walked. His armor was battered, scratched from many battles. His pack was heavy, but he carried it without complaint. He looked like a warrior, yet he had shown them only kindness. She wondered what kind of man he was. What had brought him to this world? Why had he not abandoned them like everyone else? Her son tugged at her sleeve. "Mama," he whispered, "is he going to stay with us?" She froze at the question. Her lips parted, but no words came. She did not know the answer. How could she? This human had given them food, warmth, and safety, but he was still a stranger. The boy lowered his voice, his eyes shining with hope. "I want him to stay. He looks strong. He could protect us. Maybe he could be like father." His voice cracked on the last word. The widow's heart broke. Her daughter, too young to hide her feelings, reached her small arms toward the human. She whispered in a tiny voice, "Papa." The widow gasped, her chest tightened. Tears stung her eyes. She shook her head quickly, pulling her daughter close. "No, child, he is not." But her voice failed. The little girl did not understand. She only smiled, her eyes fixed on the human with innocent trust. The human heard the word. He paused in his steps. For a moment he stood still, his back straight. His shoulders seemed to grow heavier, slowly. He turned his head. His eyes met the widow's. She looked away quickly, ashamed. The widow wanted to scold her children, to silence their pleas, but she could not. Their voices were born of need, of hunger not only for food but for safety, for love, for a father. They longed for someone strong to shield them, someone they could trust. As they stopped to rest by a shallow stream, the boy finally spoke directly to the human. His words were broken, but his meaning was clear. He touched his chest, then pointed at the human. "Father?" he asked softly. The widow's eyes widened. She felt the heat rise in her face. "No," she whispered sharply. But her son did not stop. His small hand reached toward the human again. His eyes begged for an answer. The human looked at the boy, then at the widow. His face was calm but unreadable. He did not laugh. He did not scold. Instead, he knelt down, meeting the boy's gaze. He placed his hand gently on the child's shoulder. His lips moved. He spoke in his strange human tongue. The boy did not understand the words, but he understood the warmth in the man's touch. The widow turned her face away, her heart a storm. She wanted to scream that this was wrong, that her children could not place such hopes on a stranger. But deep inside, another voice whispered. Perhaps this was not wrong at all. Perhaps this was the only chance left. That night, they camped beneath the stars. The human built a small fire with careful hands. Its light glowed on his face. making his features softer, less foreign. The children huddled near him, their fear fading in the warmth of his presence. The widow sat apart, watching, her mind a battlefield. She remembered her husband's face, his laugh, his promises, but those promises had turned to ash with his body on the battlefield. Now, her children whispered to a man not of their blood, calling him Papa. She wanted to pull them away, but she could not. Their smiles were too rare, their laughter too precious. Could she take it from them? The boy looked at the human again, his voice quiet but firm. Please stay. Please protect us. The little girl echoed him, her small hands clutching the man's arm. Papa! Don't leave. The human froze, his hand tightened on the hilt of his weapon as if remembering old battles. His eyes closed for a moment. When he opened them, there was something new inside them. Not just duty, but conflict. He had not come here to be a father. He had not planned to save a widow and her children. Yet their voices pierced through the walls he had built around his heart. The widow's breath caught as she saw his face. For the first time, he looked unsure, torn between walking away and staying. The fire crackled, the stars shone, and in that quiet moment, the fate of their small family trembled on the edge of choice. The children pressed closer to him. Their small voices whispered again, "Please, don't go." And though the human gave no answer in words, his silence carried weight. He did not move away. He stayed by the fire, watching over them until morning. The widow closed her eyes, her heart beating fast. She knew now that her children had planted a seed. They had asked for the impossible. A father from another world, a protector from another race. But sometimes, in the vast cold of the galaxy, the impossible was the only hope left. The widow's decision. The night after the children's plea lingered like a heavy shadow over the widow's heart. She had tried to sleep, but every time she closed her eyes, she heard their voices again. Papa, don't leave. Please protect us. The fire had died down to glowing embers, the human still awake, his figure dark against the stars. His weapon rested on his knees, his eyes scanning the horizon, always alert, always ready. The widow clutched her children close. Her daughter slept peacefully for the first time in many nights. Her tiny hands curled against her mother's chest. Her son slept too, his head resting on the borrowed cloth the human had given. Their breathing was steady, calm. For them, the human's presence was already an answer. He had become the wall between them and the darkness. But for the widow, her heart was in chaos, her pride, her fear, her memories of her lost husband. All of them screamed against what her children asked. Yet the truth could not be silenced. She could not protect them alone. She was weak, her strength fading. If not for the human's food, the human's fire, they would already be gone. By dawn, her decision was growing like a blade inside her chest. She had fought against it for days, but now she could not. Her children needed more than scraps of hope. They needed safety. They needed someone stronger than her. The morning was quiet. Birds circled above the ruins, their cries sharp in the thin air. The human packed his belongings carefully, preparing to move on. He glanced at the widow, then at the children, his expression unreadable. Perhaps he was already planning to leave, to continue his journey alone. The thought struck her like a knife. If he left, she and her children would be nothing but ghosts within days. She could not let him go. She could not lose the only chance they had left. Her hands trembled as she rose to her feet. She placed her daughter gently on the ground beside her son. Then she stepped forward. Her breath came fast. Her knees weakened, but she forced herself on. The human noticed her movement. He paused, his eyes sharp, watching her approach. Then, before he could react, she did something no widow of her people would ever do. She fell to her knees in the dirt before him, her head lowered, her hands trembling. Her voice broke as she whispered words she never thought she would speak. "Please, take me as your wife." The air froze, even the wind seemed to stop. Her children stirred, their sleepy eyes opening. Her son sat up quickly, his mouth falling open in shock. Her daughter blinked, confused. The widow's face burned with shame, but she kept her forehead pressed to the earth. Her people would spit on her for this. They would call her cursed, weak, desperate, but she no longer cared. She would kneel 1,000 times if it meant her children could live. The human did not move. His shadow loomed over her, heavy and silent. She could feel his eyes on her. Her heart pounded so loudly it drowned out the world. At last, she lifted her head slightly, her eyes wet with tears. Her voice broke again, louder this time. Please, I beg you. Be my husband. Be their father. Protect us. I have nothing left to offer. No dowry, no wealth, only my loyalty, my service, and my children's love. The human's eyes narrowed. His face was unreadable. Perhaps he was angry, perhaps shocked. But he did not step away. He did not turn his back. The widow's son suddenly crawled to her side, his small hand gripping her arm, his voice desperate. Mama, don't beg, he cried. His eyes flashed toward the human. He already cares for us. He will stay, won't he? The boy's voice cracked, hope and fear battling inside him. Her daughter toddled forward and wrapped her tiny arms around the human's leg. Her soft voice spoke the word again, the word that carried both hope and pain. Papa. The widow's tears fell freely now, her pride shattered, her soul laid bare. If you leave us, she whispered, her voice trembling, we will not survive. I cannot watch my children die. If marriage is what it takes, then take me, I will belong to you. The human's jaw tightened. His hand gripped his weapon as though the weight of her words was heavier than any battle he had fought. His eyes burned with conflict. He looked at the children clinging to him, at the woman kneeling in the dirt. Her face was pale, her body shaking, but her words were filled with truth. Minutes passed in silence, minutes that felt like hours. The widow dared not move. Her children clung to him, waiting. Finally, the human knelt down, his movements slow, controlled. He reached out a hand and lifted her chin. His touch was firm but not cruel. Their eyes met. Hers filled with tears, his filled with storm. He did not speak words she could understand, but his gaze told her everything. He was torn, caught between his own path and the lives now pressed into his hands. The widow's heart stopped as he finally breathed out. A single word fell from his lips, deep and steady. Yes. The world seemed to shift. Her breath broke into a sob. Her children cried out in joy, throwing themselves into his arms. The widow bowed her head again, relief flooding her body. But deep in her chest, fear still stirred. For though the human had agreed, she knew the galaxy was cruel. The enemies of her people would not forgive this union. Danger would follow them like a shadow. And yet, for the first time since the war began, she felt something stronger than fear. Hope. Enemies in the shadows. The days that followed were quiet on the surface, yet beneath the silence, danger brewed. The widow walked beside the human now. No longer just a stranger but the man who had accepted her desperate plea. Her children followed close, clinging to the human's presence as if he were a shield against the cold universe. The human was no ordinary traveler. His movements revealed discipline. His eyes scanned every horizon, every broken path. He rose before dawn, built fires with practiced skill, and carried his weapon with a soldier's hand. To the widow, it became clear. This was a man who had survived countless battles. For a short time, it felt as though fate had turned merciful. The children laughed more. Their small bellies no longer empty, their eyes no longer hollow. They sat close to the human at night, listening to the strange sound of his voice as he spoke in his own tongue. They did not understand the words, but his tone carried comfort. But peace is fragile, especially in a broken galaxy. The widow first noticed it in whispers among the ruins they passed. Shadows that moved too quickly, eyes watching from the dark. She tried to dismiss them, but her instincts screamed danger. Then, one night, as they camped near the jagged cliffs, the human stiffened. His hand went to his weapon, his eyes sharpened. The widow froze, clutching her daughter. "What is it?" she whispered. The human held up his hand, signaling silence. He listened, his body tense. Then she heard it too. The faint crunch of boots on stone, the rustle of figures moving through the dark. Raiders. Her blood turned to ice. Raiders had no mercy. They stole food, burned homes, and took the weak as slaves. They had already destroyed her world once. Now they hunted again. The human rose, his movements silent but sure. He gestured to the widow, pointing toward a narrow crack in the cliffs. His meaning was clear: hide. The widow gathered her children, her heart hammering. She pushed them into the crevice, shielding their small bodies with her own. But her eyes remained fixed on the human. Fear battled with trust. Would he abandon them now to save himself? Or would he truly fight for them? The raiders came, their voices harsh, their laughter cruel. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark, weapons gleaming. They had seen the fire. They had smelled the food. One called out in a guttural voice, mocking, "We smell prey, a widow and her brats, maybe? Bring them out." The widow's body shook. Her daughter whimpered. The boy pressed his hand over her mouth, whispering for silence. The human stepped forward, his shadow tall in the firelight. He did not hide. He did not run. Instead, he faced them head-on. His weapon gleamed in his hand. His voice rang out, harsh, strong, a warning, though the raiders could not understand his human tongue. His tone carried no doubt. "Come closer and die." The raiders laughed. "One man?" One sneered. "One against many?" They rushed forward. The widow clutched her children tighter, her eyes wide. She wanted to close them, to block out the horror. But she could not. She watched as the human moved. He fought like a storm, his weapon cracked through the night, his strikes fast and brutal. He dodged their blades with trained precision. Every movement was controlled, deadly. He was outnumbered. Yet the raiders began to fall one by one. The widow's son gasped in awe, whispering, "He fights for us." But even storms can be overwhelmed. More raiders poured from the shadows. Their numbers doubled, then tripled. The human gritted his teeth. His strength did not falter, but he could not fight forever. One raider slipped past him, heading for the crevice where the widow and children hid. The widow's blood froze. She shielded her little ones with her body, closing her eyes. But before the raider could strike, the human was there. His blade cut through the darkness. The attacker fell. The widow's breath caught. Tears blurred her vision. This man, this human, was not fighting for himself alone. He was fighting for them. The battle raged until the raiders, realizing their losses, retreated into the night, their curses echoing against the cliffs. The ground was littered with their dead. The fire smothered in the chaos. Silence returned, broken only by the widow's sobs and the heavy breathing of the human. He stood in the blood-soaked dirt, his armor torn, his face streaked with sweat and ash. His eyes burned with fury. But when they met hers, the fire softened. He had chosen, again and again, to fight for her and her children. The widow stumbled from the crevice, her knees weak. She fell before him, clutching his hand. Her tears fell onto his skin. You did not leave us?" she whispered. Her voice broke with both relief and disbelief. The human said nothing. His breath was heavy. His hand tightened around hers just once, firm, steady. The children ran to him, clinging to his legs. Their small voices cried out, "Papa! Papa!" And for the first time, the human did not flinch. He did not step back. His hand rested gently on their heads. But far in the distance, the sound of horns echoed through the night. The widow's heart dropped. This was only the beginning. The raiders would return, and not just with a few. They would come with an army. The shadows of the galaxy had noticed them, and now they would not stop. The widow's decision had bound them together. The human's vow had drawn blood. And now, enemies hunted them all. The human's vow. The night after the battle was long and restless. The air still smelled of blood and smoke. The ground was littered with the marks of struggle, and the silence that followed was heavy, almost too heavy. The widow sat close to her children. Their small bodies curled against her. They had fallen asleep at last, their exhaustion deeper than fear, but she herself could not rest. Her eyes stayed fixed on the man who stood just beyond the firelight. The human did not sit. He stood tall, his weapon in hand, his face hard in the glow of the embers. His armor was torn, streaks of blood covered his arms. Yet his eyes remained sharp. He looked like a wall of stone, unshakable, unbreakable. The widow's heart trembled. She had begged him to be her husband. She had given her pride away. But tonight, as she watched him fight, she realized something more. He had not just accepted her plea. He had already chosen. He had already acted as a father, as a protector. When dawn came, the hills glowed faintly with light. the human turned his gaze to the horizon. He seemed to be waiting, listening. His silence was heavy, as though he carried a burden too great to speak aloud. Finally, he approached. His boots crunched over the stones. The widow lifted her head. Fear and hope tangled in her chest. Her children stirred, waking slowly, their tired eyes brightening when they saw him. He stood before them, silent for a long moment. Then, without warning, he knelt, his heavy frame lowering until he was eye to eye with the children. His scarred hands rested on the earth, steady and strong. The boy looked at him with wide eyes. The little girl whispered again, that single word, "Papa." The human's eyes softened, for the first time since they met. He let his guard down. His hand rose, resting gently on the boy's head, then on the girl's. His lips parted, and he spoke in his own tongue. His voice deep, carrying weight like thunder. Though they could not understand every word, the tone was clear. He was making a promise. The widow's breath caught, her heart raced. She listened to his vow. His words strange yet powerful, and she understood not by language but by spirit. He would not leave them. He would fight for them. He would be their father, their protector, their family. The widow's eyes blurred with tears, her body shook. For so long, she had felt abandoned by her people, cursed by fate. But here, kneeling before her children, was a human who carried no blood tie to them, no duty by law, and yet he chose them, he chose her. The human's voice grew louder, fiercer. His hand gripped his weapon and raised it high. The sun caught the steel, sending sparks of light across the hills. His vow was not only for them. It was for the galaxy itself, a roar into the heavens. Any who came to harm them would face him first. The widow felt her knees weaken. She dropped to the ground, covering her mouth as sobs broke from her chest. This man, this human, had given her what no one else had. Not pity, not charity, but a vow stronger than stone. Her children cried out with joy, clinging to him. Their small voices echoed through the morning air. "Papa! Papa!" The human did not flinch, he held them close, his broad arms wrapping around their small bodies, his face bent low, pressing against their hair. His silence was no longer distance. It was strength, a shield. The widow crawled forward, her tears falling freely. She bowed her head until it touched the ground at his feet. Her voice cracked. "I will serve you all my days. I will stand by you. I will be your wife." The human reached down, his hand lifted her chin. His eyes met hers. For a long moment, no words passed between them, only truth. Then he spoke, slow and steady, his accent rough but the meaning clear. "You are mine, and I am yours." The widow's heart shattered, not in sorrow, but in relief. Her hands clutched his. She could barely breathe, but even as joy filled their small camp, danger still whispered in the wind. The raiders had fled, yes, but not in defeat. They had seen the human's power. They had felt his fury. They would not forget. They would return with more, with greater numbers, with vengeance. The human knew this. His eyes hardened as he looked once more toward the horizon. His vow had been made, and it bound him now to war. But for the widow, for the children, it was enough. For the first time since her world burned, she felt safe, truly safe. She leaned into him, her children in his arms, and whispered the words she had buried deep in her heart. "Thank you, husband." The human closed his eyes, his jaw tightened. His grip around them grew stronger. He had taken a vow, and nothing in the galaxy would break it. Love beyond the stars. The days that followed were unlike any the widow had ever known. For the first time since her husband's death, she no longer walked with fear in her chest. For the first time, her children laughed freely. Their faces, once pale and empty, now glowed with light. They clung to the human not out of desperation, but out of love. Every morning, he trained. His body moved with the rhythm of a warrior, his weapon flashing in the air. His scars told of battles survived. His eyes told of burdens carried. But now, he no longer trained for himself alone. Every strike, every swing, was a promise. A shield for the family that now belonged to him. The widow watched him in silence, her heart both heavy and full. He was not of her people, not of her world. Yet he had given her more than they ever had. When she bowed before her own kind, they turned away. When she begged them for food, they mocked her. But this human, this stranger from the stars, had chosen her children. In the evenings, they sat around the fire, the children curled against him. Their small voices asked him questions he could not understand, but he answered anyway, his voice deep and warm, his laughter rare but real. The widow listened, her chest tightening every time the children called him Papa. And he no longer denied it, he no longer turned away. The galaxy, however, was not blind. The raiders who had fled spread stories, tales of a human warrior who had taken an alien widow and her children. Some mocked the story, calling it weakness, others feared it, whispering that a human who fought for love could not be broken. Soon others came. Not raiders but travelers, merchants and refugees. They passed through the same valleys and ruins. They saw the family together, saw the human standing guard, saw the widow walking proudly at his side, and the whispers grew. They are not just survivors. Some said, they are proof that even across species, love can bloom. The widow felt it too, the weight of eyes upon them, but instead of shame, she felt pride. She no longer bowed her head, she walked taller. She was no longer just a poor widow, she was the wife of a human, the mother of children who now had a father stronger than steel. One night, as the stars stretched wide across the sky, the widow asked the question that had lived in her heart. Why? Her voice trembled as she spoke, her eyes shone with firelight. Why did you not leave us? You had no reason, no bond, no duty. Why us? The human looked at her for a long time, his silence heavy. Then he reached for her hand. His touch was rough but steady. He spoke slowly, carefully, choosing words she could understand. Because you are mine, because they are mine, and I will never leave what is mine. Her heart broke and healed in the same breath. Tears slid down her face as she pressed her forehead to his chest. Her children smiled in their sleep, their dreams safe under his watch. The vow he had spoken was no longer just words. It had become truth. But the galaxy was cruel. The raiders did return. This time in greater numbers. Their ships darkened the sky. Their war cries filled the air. The widow trembled, holding her children close. But the human did not falter. He stood tall, his weapon ready. His eyes burned with fire. The battle that followed was fierce. Blood and fire rained upon the land. Yet the human fought like a storm made flesh. Every strike of his blade, every shot of his weapon, was a roar of defiance. The raiders fell one after another, broken by his fury. When it was done, when silence returned at last, the raiders lay scattered in defeat. The human stood over them, bloodied but unbroken, and in that moment, a legend was born. Whispers carried across the stars, stories of the human who fought not for riches, not for power, but for love, for a widow and her children. Some called him mad, others called him noble, but all agreed on one thing. Humanity was not to be underestimated. The widow held her children close as she walked to his side, her voice soft but steady. You are more than my husband. You are our shield, our hope, our home. He looked at her, his face weary, his body scarred, but in his eyes burned a light stronger than war. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her and the children, and for the first time, he spoke in words she fully understood. Family. The stars above seemed brighter, the night no longer cold, for in the vast emptiness of the galaxy, a bond had been forged that no blade could sever. The alien widow was no longer alone, her children no longer fatherless. They had found safety, they had found love, they had found humanity, and across the stars, their story spread. A tale of sorrow turned to strength, of despair turned to hope. A tale that proved once more why humanity was feared, why humanity was admired, why humanity was celebrated. Because when humans love, they love with fire. When they protect with fury. And when they vow, their vow shakes the very galaxy.